ICQ Podcast episode 371, Improving Your SSB Contact Ratio. Well, hello and welcome, fellow amateur radio enthusiasts, to this, our 371st episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast. Supported this episode by David Pyle, Kilo Whiskey 1, Delta X-Ray, David Reed, Whiskey 6, Kilo Lima, and our monthly and end subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M1MRB is joined by Dan KB6 November Uniform, Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, and Ed DD5 Lima Papa to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BRY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is discussing improving your SSB contact ratio. Well, every episode we say that we can't do what we do without the very kind support of you, our kind listeners. And this episode, we'd like to thank David Pyle, Kilo Whiskey 1 Delta X-Ray. And short little message says, I'm a listener. Message to the team is another great year. The discussions inspire me to try new parts of the hobby. Keep up the good work. It's fully appreciated. So many thanks, David, for your very kind message to the guys. And David, along with another David Reed, Whiskey 6 Kilo Lima, and of course our monthly subscription donors have helped us pay our way and produce the show for you without adverts or putting behind paywalls, etc. You can do your bit to keep your ICQ podcasts advert free and available for you on the internet by doing something very, very simple. Just think of the value you got from our show and then go to icqpodcast.com/donate, and there's some options to click on a link there for you, or you can choose your own and send that value our way, and we would greatly appreciate all the support you give us. Now we're going to head on now with our show, and we're going to join Martin, Dan, Edmund and Ed to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including special edition Greek stamps and promoting our lifelong hobby. As always, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to this episode of the ICQ Podcast, episode 371, and this is the news roundtable for that episode. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU. Hi, Dan.
Hi, guys. Glad to be back this time.
Yeah, good to have you, and I know you were very, very busy last time in your new job, so, it's understandable, but great to have you, Dan.
It's rough having a job.
Oh, I haven't got one at the moment, Dan, so I got no excuse. Oh, dear. Moving over to Germany, we've got Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP. Hi, Ed.
Yep, good evening, everybody.
Yeah, and you normally do your evening all, and which is your Dixon and Doc Green impersonation. And now there'll be loads of people looking at who Dixon and Doc Green was. We might have to tell them one day, Ed. Okay, and back to the UK with me, we got Mr. Edmund Spicer, M0MMG. Hi, Edmund.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Yeah. So we're all here tonight. As I was saying to the boys before we started, this week's news roundtable is probably not the same as normal because there has been very, very little news over the last fortnight to discuss. Lots of announcements where you can say, Fred did this, or somebody did this, or why. But in this episode, not a lot to discuss. But I think we found some interesting stories. So I'm going to start off with an Enthusiast radio collection in the press. Now, the Daily Mail ran an article and showed Richard's collection of radios. And for anybody that is into looking at old radios, please go to our website, click on the link, because there's some gorgeous pieces in here. What do you think, Ed?
Yeah, great, and the pictures, especially in the Daily Mail article or Mail Online. You look at this and you think, crikey, where's he got all those radios from? I mean, some apparently came from his father, but then he's just carried on collecting, and he's, a lot of radios you'd have in the front room of the house and things, rather than technical or amateur radio type radios, particularly more home radios. But my personal favourite, one of the pictures there shows a cabinet full of old test gear like Avro 8 meters and multimeters and different things. And because he actually restores all of this equipment, or has been doing for 50 years. And, he's a real technical sort of guy and doing a great job restoring these to their original glory. I mean, you look at the cases of some of them, there's polished wood cases, and they look like they would have looked when they were bought new from the shop. So all I can say is it's Richard Allen. He's 85 and he's doing a great job, and all the best to him, and hopefully he'll have some fun out of the radios for years to come. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a work of love. In many ways, I have done some of this stuff myself, refurbished stuff, and you sometimes you've got to buy it at the right price. But even when you buy it at the right price, you can't make any money out of repairing or putting stuff back together. It has to be a labour of love, this stuff, in fairness. So, it's one of those things where, he's obviously got a lot of enjoyment out of this. What do you think, Dan?
Oh, I love this collection. As Ed mentioned, the woodwork on this stuff is just amazing too. That's one thing that really catches my eye. He's got one piece there that looks like a fan, fanning out from one of the corners, and that's just beautiful stuff.
Yeah, I was just saying that you've got to have a lot of skills to do these old radios. I've seen some of the YouTube videos of people repairing cases on YouTube, and there's some clever people out there. I watched one gentleman, and he said, okay, he's never seen another one of these radios advertised anywhere. And the radio itself wasn't a particularly good performer, but he literally had to rebuild the whole case. And this radio probably cost him in excess of $600 to put back to showroom condition. And it's probably only worth about $40 if you try to sell it. So, in fairness, these sort of things are done out of love. I will say that. Edmund, what's your thoughts?
Well, I certainly agree with the comments about looking at the photographs. When I saw them, my first thought was this looks like a professional museum, such as what we have at Amberley here in West Sussex, rather than a private collection. So it's very well presented and very well turned out. And I was particularly taken by his comment that approximately 90% of his collection is working, and he's glad it's not 100%, because if it were 100%, that would mean he would have nothing to work on in his workshop. So it's clearly a labour of love, isn't it? And it's just a little bit of a pity that he's not a licensed radio amateur, in contrast to a couple of his relatives a few decades back, because if he were to hold a licence, then I would think that he could well be in the running for a permanent special event station call sign. And last but not least, he's very lucky in terms of his location, because he mentions that he often listens to Radio Norfolk on his radio sets there, and I would imagine that the vast majority of them are medium wave AM band and long wave receivers rather than VHF FM. And Radio Norfolk is one of the few BBC local radio stations in England that still has a medium wave transmitter on the air. They had two, but they closed one of them in 2020 as part of efficiency measures. So 873 kilohertz, I think it is still going as far as I know. So if he's in range of that and he can listen to that on all his vintage radios, then he's a very lucky boy in terms of where he's located, Martin.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And I know you went to the National Communications Museum with me. I think you also went to the Dulwich Wireless Museum, which are equally interesting places to go if you get a chance. This is Richard's own collection, but there are a couple of really good museums in the UK if they're reopened since COVID. And one of them, as I said, is the Dulwich Wireless Museum. The other one is the National Communications Museum in Derby, I believe, isn't it? Just trying to think where it was, Edmund. I know.
Yes, it is in Derby, and the Dulwich Museum. If you want information about that, if you do a search using your favourite search engine for the British BVWS, British Vintage Wireless Society, their website should give you all the latest.
Yeah, so some good things if you like playing and looking at old radios, and some of them are actually just works of art. They're furniture. They're not just radios. They're nice pieces of furniture and works of art. Okay, moving to our next news story. We have new postage stamps feature amateur radio in Greece. Now, there's still people collecting postage stamps. I used to chat to a guy quite often. He'd come in and see me in the afternoons when I was working on the railway and tell me about what he was doing on his stamp collections. But there's still some good stuff out there, and I hope these get used because it is promoting our hobby to amateur radio. Now, Dan, I'm going to let you go first, but I also know you got sent some stamps as well, didn't you, at one point in time recently?
Yeah, just recently, in fact, a friend of mine from high school, in fact, sent me some 4 stamps of four U.S. postage stamps that were printed in 1964 that promoted amateur radio. And they were first-class stamps at the time, and they were only 5 cents. But yeah, that was really nice of him. He knew I was a ham radio operator and sent me the stamps. Now, as far as these go, this is a great thing, like you say, if people will use them and pass them around and get a little publicity for ham radio. Unfortunately, only 5,000 are going to be produced, though. So I don't know how many will actually get on letters.
Well, I think from what I remember of people that collect stamps, if they've got a postmark on them and they've been through the post, I think that adds value to them. So hopefully a good proportion will go through the post anyway, even if it's somebody sending an envelope back to themselves. Hi. There you go. What do you think, Edmund?
I think stamps are a good medium for featuring amateur radio because there are people out there who are not philatelists out and out, but who will have a few stamps that they've collected. And I'm an example of that. My wife loves car boot sales, antique shops, vintage stores, and whenever I'm going around those with her, I will always have a look if I see some envelopes with stamps on them or first day covers or similar things, because I half-heartedly collect stamps from the year that I was born without actually being a stamp collector, particularly if the stamps date from the very month I was born or a month or two either side. So I've got several, some of which feature broadcasting actually, because the BBC was celebrating a particular anniversary the year I was born. I'm not going to say which anniversary it was, otherwise people will be able to calculate my age. But I don't, in my travels, ever remember seeing British stamps anyway, in any case, featuring amateur radio. So if anybody listening to this knows if there ever have been British stamps featuring amateur radio, I'd be very interested to know. And also, if anybody out there knows who I would need to petition and write to encourage amateur radio to be put on special issue stamps in the future, again, I'd be very interested to hear from them. And last but not least, if you work somebody in Greece, maybe if you arrange a direct QSL card from them rather than it going via the bureau, if you're very lucky, you might find that the envelope that lands on your doormat bears one of these stamps, but you'd have to be very lucky because, as already been mentioned, there's only 5,000 of them being produced, so I can see them being very sought after, Martin.
Yeah, so can I. And I'm sure we've done something on radio or communications over the years. I just can't think what, but not being a stamp collector is, but I still think we've done it. Ed, what do you think on this?
Well, these stamps are actually available for purchase from February the 15th. I suspect, like a lot of these things, that they advertise in blocks of 4, even though the price is the standard price for first-class mail in the EU. The majority of these are probably going to be bought by collectors and kept as a block of 4 rather than actually posting them. I hope somebody does sort of buy them, if not accidentally, just coincidentally, and puts them onto letters and send them to anybody, because anywhere where we get something on a letter or however out into the public and somebody says, amateur radio, what's that? And then can go to their favourite search engine and have a look, and maybe that's going to trigger another 1% of the people inquiring might actually do something about amateur radio. So it's good to have publicity out there and advertising for the hobby. And well done on whoever organised this with the authorities in Greece to have it happen.
Yeah, well, I'll let you into a little secret. Our postman arrives probably around just after 9:30 most mornings. We don't get letters every day through the door. And the current postman's our postman, Roy, nice guy. We had Pete for a couple of years, also a nice guy. And when we chat to them, they're quite good guys. But I do refer to, when we get letters come through the door, I do refer to it as hate mail. And the reason I refer to it as hate mail is because usually when you get a letter through the door, you've got to do something. They're finding you something to do. So I joke and say to Mrs. B, "Oh, the hate mail's just arrived. Hi." But if I got one of these from Greece, I certainly wouldn't call it hate mail. I'd be quite pleased. So there you go. Okay, move to our next news story. Amateur radio, a lifelong technical hobby. Now, the South Dublin Radio Club is inviting people along on the 10th of March to a Zoom presentation. Now, I think this is possibly very important because hopefully not only the youngsters, but even the people who've been in the hobby a while, hopefully will get something out of this. I think that there'll be ideas shared and some enthusiastic chat, I would suggest. Dan, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, what I like about this is that it's being sponsored by Engineers Ireland, which I'm going to guess is the Professional Engineer Society in Ireland. It kind of mirrors what I'm seeing here in the U.S. about professional societies promoting ham radio. I just found out recently about the IEEE chapter in Chicago, not only doing presentations like this, but also holding amateur radio classes. And I think that's great. I mean, obviously amateur radio is a perfect hobby for technical people. And, I'm almost surprised that we haven't seen more of this in the past. But now that it's happening, I'm certainly not going to complain.
Yeah, as you say, it's a coming together of like-minded minds. I think throughout the lockdown, we had a lot of people join our hobby. It's got the airwaves were absolutely clogged at one point in time. They've gone back to being very, very quiet again. But I think this could be some enthusiastic chat to explain some new things to some of the newbies that are coming in. And let's face it, some of the people have been in the hobby a long time. You can still always learn something. So, yes, a lifelong technical hobby. Ed, what's your thoughts?
Well, adding to what Dan says and actually turning it around a little bit, the link to engineers, organisations, associations, not only could the hobby be of interest to already technical people, but the hobby with youngsters can generate people that go into those technical industries. And the engineers are always looking to get new people into those work positions. And anything that's of a technical nature as a hobby in a youngster, it might be pushing them in the direction of engineering, electrical, radio, space, whatever, coming out of the amateur radio hobby into those industries. So it works both ways, and well done on the South Dublin Club for putting this on. Wish them all the luck, and if it also builds the relationship between Amateur Radio in Ireland and Engineers Ireland, all the better.
Yeah, agree 100% with you, Ed, 100% on that one. It's anything that shows us in a good light is well worth doing. And, our hobby is so vast. You could be a shortwave listener, or you might not ever pick up a microphone. And I know amateurs that never go on the air. The guy I'm thinking of off the top of my head is a silent key now. But I remember him he got all the way to his full license, and the only time he'd ever operated was on a foundation course where you have to make an HF and a VHF contact. And after that, he'd done nothing for years. And I remember sitting him down one Sunday afternoon. We were doing a contest. Was it Saturday or Sunday? A day at the weekend anyway. We were doing a contest, a 2-meter contest. And I sat him down and said, why don't you log? And he sat down and he logged for a while. And then the other guy said, go on, you have a go. And he ended up having a go. So, the hobby's so wide, even if people don't transmit, there's repairing old radios, there's antennas, there's all these sort of things that are very, very interesting, that keep your mind active. And that's the important thing. As people get older, it's worth keeping their minds active. And as youngsters, it sparks new ideas, but it also gives youngsters a foundation in which to build on. So good on the South Dublin Club for this. And I wish you every success. Right, move to our last news story. As I said, there wasn't a lot to discuss, so hopefully this one will excite Edmund. I know this. The Avro Lancaster is 80th anniversary. Now, this was a World War II bomber. I don't normally like to promote war stories, but this is such an iconic aircraft. And the special event station is being run, or special event is being run not only in the UK, but in Australia and Canada, because they also used this aircraft. And in fairness, it's one of the few probably left flying. There's not many of them left flying. There's only one or two in the world now. So some interesting pictures when you look at the website. Edmund, don't tell me you aren't going to have a go at this one.
Well, I've looked at the QRZ.com pages for all 3 call signs, and all of them contain sizable entries. They're not just a couple of sentences and one photo. So it's well worth looking on QRZ.com for all 3 of those call signs. I will certainly be attempting to get the Golf Bravo special event call sign in my log. My QRP wire antennas that are quite low to the ground in wavelength terms are probably going to struggle to work anybody in Victor Echo or Victor Kilo land. But the one in the UK I will certainly be going after. And what's notable about that call sign, first of all, is that it is a special event call sign by virtue of having 2 numbers in it. But furthermore, Ofcom have kindly agreed that it may be operated at different points in the year from different locations. So it's not subject to the usual 28 days in a row maximum, and then you have to wait a certain amount of time before you can use it again. And I'm going to give credit where it's due here, because in the past on the ICQ podcast, certain people have criticised Ofcom where that has been merited. But by the same token, if credit is due, then I'm more than happy to give credit where it's due. And credit is due to Ofcom here, because in the last couple of years in particular, they appear to have been extremely flexible and accommodating with arrangements such as this. So full marks to them for agreeing to this and making it possible. And many thanks, of course, to the operators on all three call signs across the world who are going to be putting this on the air, so that people like me who enjoy hunting after special event stations have got something to go after to put in our logs. And last but not least, if you're on Facebook, there is a Facebook group whose name has changed in the last couple of months, I think. These days it is known as GB and EI, Golf Bravo and Echo India Radio Amateur Special Event Stations. It's run by Mark, Golf 1 Papa India Echo, who does a great job at running it. And anybody, whether you're in the UK or the Republic of Ireland or not, if you're interested in working special event stations from those countries and club call signs as well, then it's well worth joining that group on Facebook, and I'm sure that Mark would make you very welcome.
Well, that's a good one. So I knew you'd be enthusiastic about that one, Edmund. Not a problem. Okay, Ed, you seem to remember these flying around the UK in your early years in the UK. And I know you're younger than me, but I don't ever remember seeing one. But apart from the current one, which I think flies on the Battle of Britain group. But what do you think?
Yeah, I saw them when I was a child or a teenager at air shows, and they were really the workhorse bomber of the Second World War for the UK, or should we say the British Commonwealth countries. I know the US had their own even larger bombers, but in the case of the Australian battalions, or what are they called anyway, the groups, and the Canadian and the UK ones, the Lancaster was a very famous aircraft. I remember one of my friends from my first radio club, again, was when I was in my teens back in Hull in England. He used to be the radio officer on a Lancaster bomber, and also did some of the first airborne radar tests from there. He was one of the people that was involved in radar in the Second World War, and that was built inside a Lancaster as well. Unless I've got that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's correct. As for the special event stations, yeah, I agree with Martin. We maybe shouldn't be celebrating war of any kind. However, this also celebrates the technology and the fact that these aircraft still exist in museums around the world, and a lot of work is done to keep them in a state that they look like they did back in the day, even if they may not be able to be flown now. And as for the actual call signs, I don't think we've actually mentioned what they are. Maybe we have. It's GB8TLAN, VK8TLAN, and VE8TLAN. In the case of the Australian one, they will have different people operating it from their home locations, but they're also going to actually operate it at some point from the actual radio room inside the Lancaster bomber in the RAAF Aviation Heritage Museum in Bull Creek in Western Australia. So that would be the contact I'd like to get. And, from here, perhaps 40 metres early in the morning on the Grey Line, it might be possible to get a contact with that special event station actually from the aircraft itself. But I'd be happy to work, obviously, any of them, and we'll see what comes along. But great that this is a special event that's managed to get similar call signs in 3 different countries. So, actually on 3 different continents, in 3 different IARU regions. So that's quite something. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, there's a lot of well planning gone on this. So, when I first came into the hobby, one of the first lectures, I was a member of Sutton and Cheam, still am to this day, but I also joined the Wimbledon Club, which is 5 miles from my house. And the first lecture I went to the Wimbledon Club, there was a gentleman who did a talk on the 1155 receiver. The Lancaster bombers had 1155 receivers and 1154 transmitters. And one of the pictures shows the receiver and the transmitters up in the top left. I'm assuming the other 2 knobs, which was a big red one, a big blue one, was possibly a tuner. I say possibly, but they say the transmitter, the 1154, and the receiver 1155, interesting devices. And they'll cost you an absolute fortune at rallies. Now, I've seen rusting hulks going for over £100, which just for spare parts. So well sought after. And as I say, my lecture at the Wimbledon Club, well over 20 plus years ago, was from a gentleman who actually worked at the factory where they were made. So that's all I can tell you about it. But that to me, if you're not interested in the aircraft, have a look at the radios on board. And as I say, the 1155 receiver, if you've got one, they're worth a good few £100. If you've got the transmitter as well, your price is going to go up. So great pieces of kit, great pieces of history. And as I say, the guys putting this special event on, really good. And I'd like to thank Phil, VK6ADF, for sending me this information. So otherwise I might have missed it. But knowing what Edmund's like on special events, probably not. While I was waffling away, I forgot to bring Dan in, guys. So, Dan, okay, it's mainly a Brit thing, and you were saying that a lot of World War II bombers got made not far from you for the American forces.
Right. So I just wanted to mention to Edmund. I tell you what, Edmund, you work the Great Britain stations. I'll work the VE stations. Then we can compare notes. Because I'm not too far away from the Canadian Warplane Museum, actually. But yeah, no. So I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is just a stone's throw from Ypsilanti, Michigan, where they built the B-17 and B-24 bombers during the Second World War. And there's a museum there called the Yankee Air Force Museum, and they have a bunch of World War II planes. So this is kind of an interesting thing to me too. They actually had a ham radio station there at one point, but it's not there any longer. But yeah, it's a very famous factory. It's called the Willow Run factory here in Ypsilanti. And unfortunately, most of it's been torn down now, but it was a huge facility. General Motors used it for a while, but they tore most of the buildings down now, and they're using it as a sort of a proving grounds for autonomous vehicles. But yeah, I'm big on special event stations too, so this will be interesting to operate.
Well, that's good news, Dan. So at least I found something for both you and Edmund. But no, I say it's an interesting. There's lots of interesting things about this aircraft, and as I went off on the radio equipment on board is quite interesting as well. Okay, that concludes the news stories, and let's find out what the boys have been up to since we last spoke. Ed, do you want to go first?
Yep, happy to do so. I think I've had the last 2 weeks, I know it's 4 weeks since I've been last on the show, but over the last 2 weeks, we've had a lot of storms come through Europe, certainly through the UK and certainly through here in Germany. I live in the south of Germany. We did not get badly hit as the people in the north and the centre, thankfully. But despite that, we've had winds at times over 85 kilometres an hour and gusts over 120. So that is hurricane force. The end result is the first time the first storm came through, we didn't realise it was coming, and the antenna masts are whipping all over the place. And this is after I've repaired from the last time we had storms about 6 weeks ago. I got everything all right again. New wire in the sky, the 40-metre sky loop, new masts, and or 2 new masts of the 4, and everything hunky-dory. Along comes the storms. Nothing broke, but everything was whipping around so much that it was fairly close to it. So, first chance I got between storm front number 1 and storm front number 2, I lowered all the masts, and of course was then off the air for a couple of days. And on the last Saturday, because I wanted to be on for the free DV activation day on the last Sunday, I managed to get the masts all back up again, and the weather had improved a bit, and then I had a problem with my PC, so I couldn't run free DV. I could receive but not transmit. So I heard Edmund on, so I've made a little recording of him, so I know everything was working, but that's life with computers. In any case, we were then warned about another storm coming through, so the mast came down again and then went up again, and this time I've strengthened some other things as well. So I spent basically the last week taking down and putting up the antenna masts, so much so that I can do it in about 20 minutes now. So apart from that, the other thing, I'll throw a spoiler in here. We've been busy organising a trivia quiz with the Ham Radio Workbench podcast guys. George and myself have been talking about this, and during March we will actually have the Ham Radio Workbench team against a ICQ podcast team, and taking part in a trivia quiz. And recordings of that, or parts of that, will then appear probably on both podcasts. Certainly a clip perhaps on ICQ, but that's something a little bit out of the ordinary for ICQ. But it's nice to do something with some of the other amateur radio podcast people, and quite looking forward to that. I'm not actually taking part, as in not one of the contestants, but I'm there as a backup and technical support. So that might be something we'll cover perhaps in one of the ICQ podcasts towards the end of March, after it took place in the middle. Apart from that, trying to get on the radio when the antenna was up. Band conditions have been pretty good over the last 4 weeks. So Solar Cycle 25 is still improving. So fingers crossed that it'll keep going that way. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, well, it sounds good, and it sounds like you've been busy. And I'll have to warn you, I'm expecting Mr. Rothwell to turn up with copious amounts of coffee for me just before we do the quiz. Oh, because I get a bit leery when I've had too much coffee. No, I'm only joking. But I wouldn't be surprised if he turned up, put it that way. Edmund, what have you been up to?
Well, I'm looking forward to that quiz, especially if they give bonus points for the best deliberately wrong answer. Might manage to scrape a few points that way. As Ed has already alluded to, the big news, particularly here in southern England, was Storm Eunice the weekend prior to this podcast being released. I'm pleased to report that at my location there was no damage at all, either to my house or indeed to any of the antennas in my garden. And from listening on VHF and UHF, I'm not aware of any amateurs locally or semi-locally to me either, who have suffered any significant damage to antennas. I think a few might have had some wires fall down, but I'm not aware of any tower collapses or anything on a large scale like that. Raynets were active, somewhere near 144.6 on 2 meters. I'm not entirely sure where they were or what they were doing, but it was heartening to hear them out and about and available. if the local authorities had needed to call on them. And it was also good to hear people calling each other and just checking up that other radio amateurs were okay. There was a certain feeling of community spirit, so that was nice to hear as well. The story of survival is the Golf Bravo 3 India Whiskey GB3IW 70 centimetres repeater on the Isle of Wight. I fully expected that to go off air at some point, either because the antenna had been damaged, or the mast had been snapped in two, or the power had failed. As a testament to the repeater keeper, Paul Golf 4 India Kilo India, GB3IW stayed on the air throughout. However, I did notice that the output had become a lot weaker after Storm Eunice went through, and I've just discovered on Facebook that at the moment the mast is bent at an angle of 30 degrees, but it's not stopping people using the repeater still, so I'm sure that Paul will effect a repair on that in the days ahead. But it's incredible really, because that repeater stands on one of the highest and most exposed open areas on the Isle of Wight, and the Isle of Wight's only about 30 miles westwards from where I am, and not too far away from the repeater site at the Needles on the Isle of Wight. A gust of wind was recorded at 122 miles per hour. I don't know if that has been confirmed and officially verified as yet, but assuming it does turn out to be correct, that is the strongest gust of wind ever recorded in England. Not in the UK, as some media outlets erroneously reported. That dubious honour goes to Scotland, and they had a gust of wind up at about 170 miles per hour somewhere a few years back, I remember. But 122 miles per hour would be a record for England. And as I say, that happened only a few miles away from the GB3IW repeater site. So the fact that the box kept going at all is nothing short of miraculous. And the fact that it's still on air now and working after a fashion, even though the antenna is tilted at a 30-degree angle, that really quite something. So kudos to the repeater keeper and everybody involved with its upkeep. Apart from that, I'm still plugging away with learning CW, still finding it hard, still having days where it can feel like I'm actually going backwards, that I'm worse at it on Wednesday than I was on Tuesday. But the whole thing is heading in the right direction, hopefully. And one of the reasons for me wanting to brush it up is so I can use it on air in June for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. I'm going to put the extra letter Q for Queen into my call sign. And in fact, the RSGB, hopefully I won't be stealing Ellen's thunder here later on in the podcast, but the RSGB have got a page on their website now where everything relating to the Jubilee is bundled together. So there's this one page you can go to for all the hyperlinks that you'll need. So CW practice, getting there slowly, that's all right. And last but not least, I had a bash at FreeDV, which I've never used before. I'm sort of intermediate computer-wise. I'm not a beginner, but I'm not highly computer literate either. And I did manage to get it up and running on my Windows 10 laptop, along with my ICOM IC7300. There are very detailed notes included with the FreeDV package, several paragraphs of which are dedicated to the 7300 specifically. So that was very, very helpful. So the upshot was I didn't actually have a QSO with anybody. I heard a German station that mentioned a call sign. I don't know if the call sign belonged to the station that I was hearing or the station that he was working who I couldn't hear, but either way I partially decoded a QSO from Germany, and Ed, Mr. DD5LP there, did hear my transmission, all 25 watts of it, wasn't running high power, seeing as it's 100% duty cycle. Ed did receive my transmission, and I can tell from the voice that it's definitely me. So I confirm, Ed, that your SWL report was correct. Only thing about FreeDV is that in my limited experience of it, it seems that it can be knocked about quite a bit by adjacent SSB signals. And because there isn't a set frequency, it's a voice mode that can be used anywhere where voice is permissible on a band. If you have a strong signal in another mode, such as SSB, very close by, it can either distort? No, that's not what I mean, is it? Destroy, disrupt the FreeDV signal. And in some cases, the audio from the SSB signal can actually come through your headphones on top of the FreeDV signal. So you're not entirely sure if you're listening to a FreeDV signal or somebody transmitting SSB. So I think that was the big problem. Nearby SSB signals destroyed it, basically. Maybe another day on a much quieter band, it might work quite well. So I'm certainly not given up on FreeDV. I will have another spin at using it, probably during June for the Platinum Jubilee. But I can't honestly say, sadly, that my first experience with it was an overwhelming success. But it doesn't matter. The important thing is you try things. It's better to try something and it not to work than not to try it and then forever wonder what would have happened if. So I'm glad I had a go, and I must place my thanks on records to Ed DD5LP for all the assistance and advice and counsel that he gave me via email before, during and after. I don't think I would have found it anywhere near as easy as if Ed hadn't done that. So thank you, Ed. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, okay, mate. Sounds like you've been mega busy. And I'm going to ask Dan what he's been up to, but I know he's been out and about. So, Dan, what have you been up to since the last time we spoke?
Yeah, I have been. I was attending Hamcation this year. I flew down there to Orlando and had a couple nice days in sunny Florida and really enjoyed it. Hamcation, this is my first time there, and it turned out as kind of like a mini Dayton. I mean, there weren't quite as many attendees as at Dayton. There weren't quite as many vendors there as there are at Dayton. And the flea market wasn't quite as big, but overall a very nice experience. I was there as part of the ARDC contingent, of course, and we got to talk to a lot of folks that were interested in doing some projects. And overall, it was just a great time. Even had some good Cuban food, which was kind of nice. Aside from that, I'm still working on my updated study guide. I'll have a beta version on my website for free download pretty soon, and I'm looking forward to that because it's updating these study guides is always a lot of work. And finally, one thing our club is going to be doing is we're going to be doing a group build of one of these. It's called the True Sdr, and it's a little radio based on, I guess, the Micro SDX, which I don't know too much about the forks and the genealogy, if you will, of this radio, but it's really a tiny little radio, and it runs AM and FM and CW and even FM, they say. And there's a video of a guy in Germany who's, I guess, the basic designer of this thing, DL2MAN. And it shows him, it's only got like 1 watt output. It's very, very kind of low power, but it's got a built-in microphone. It shows him holding this thing and making a contact with somebody. And it just looks like a cool little project. And a bunch of our club members have gotten excited about it too, and we're gonna do a group build. We've got 25 people already signed up to do this, so I'm looking forward to that. As well as just throw this in too. As well as looking forward to the trivia ham radio trivia challenge. So yeah, lots of things going on, and a lot of ham radio fun.
Yeah, it certainly is. And it sounds like you've been busy, Dan. And club builds, yeah, or when you build something with a whole group of you do things. Well, that's fun because you learn a lot because not everyone will work first time, and then you learn from it. And yeah, I think that's great. And the other thing is when you do a club build as opposed to an individual doing it, when you build something as an individual, you're never 100% sure it's working to its optimum. If you do a club build where you've got a number of devices all the same, then all right, they may not be 100% the same, but you can get a good feel for whether your one is working properly or not. So that's a good one, Dan. I like that idea.
Another aspect of this too is there was one fellow who you could tell we were swapping emails on our mailing list, and there was one fellow who really you could tell he was kind of hesitant because he hadn't soldered anything for years. And we all jumped in and said, "Hey, no worries. We'll help you out. We've got the equipment, we've got the expertise, and we'll get the thing working for you." So he jumped in as well. So that was always kind of a nice thing.
Yeah, as I say, you get far more fun building it together than you will building it on your own. And yeah, it's not a race, but just take your time, enjoy it, guys. That would be my suggestion. So, right. Okay, what have I been up to? Well, I have done a little bit of HF. I've done a bit of 2 meters. I've done a bit of 4 meters, which you guys over in the US don't have. And yeah, I've been on the talk group, which is pretty much common practice. Did mention last time that I bought a little transistor, AM transistor radio, which has got medium wave and long wave. A little Roberts radio. I fixed that. Probably mentioned I fixed it, but I fixed the case. I had to re-glue the case back together. It's quite strange. They're wooden cases, and then they're wrapped with like a leatherette type cloth or vinyl type cloth over the top of wood. So and the wood glue had come loose. So I fixed that, and it works okay. I was listening to it the other day in the kitchen. I might actually keep it. I was thinking of just getting rid of it, but I might keep it because it's got a swivel base on the bottom, and so you can plonk it down and you can swivel it around to get the best signal off of the AM station. And if the station's a little bit weak, it really shows what happens. So I'm thinking I might keep it as a training aid to show, we talk about a dipole and how the signal comes great one way, but there's nothing off the ends. Well, I know there's not a dipole in this, and I know it's a ferrite rod and coils, but it gives you that, it visually gives you, or audibly gives you the effect of moving a dipole around. So that might just help people with training. Did a quick demonstration last Monday night of the talk group to some of the guys up at Sutton and Cheam on the Monday night. I had DMR and Fusion running with a couple of hotspots at the Scout Hall on completely different frequencies. And yeah, if anybody saw strange ones going through with people talking with my call sign, that was the reason, because the radios were still programmed with my call sign in. But it was only a quick demonstration that worked. And yeah, as Ed and Edmund have mentioned, the storm went through. Yes, it did. I was fairly lucky, apart from things falling over. The storm started to pick up just after 10 o'clock in the morning here. At 10:30, my neighbour came round, my next door neighbour came round and said, Martin, your shed doors are open, they're banging in the wind. And I went down, looked at my shed doors, and the bolt was on. And I thought, silly old fool, he didn't bolt it up properly. So I bolted it all up properly, shut the door, put the padlock on, went back in. 10 minutes later, looks out the kitchen window and the shed doors are open again. And it was shaking the doors, even though they were like quite protected from the wind. It's a plastic shed, and it was vibrating so much it was shook the inside bolts down, which meant the second door was loose, and then the vortex just pulled the doors open. So that was a bit of a pain. The only damage I've got, if I'm being brutally honest, I didn't get my HF antenna down, and both of them are still up and work okay. My collinear is over at about 3 or 4 degrees off of vertical now, and that's only because the bolts have probably come loose on top of the mast. And my 4 meter dipole is about 5 degrees off of vertical now. So when the warmer weather comes, the 4 meter dipole is going to be straightened up, and the 2 meter 77's collinear is booked for replacement. So that will go, and I hopefully have a new one up there. Last but not least, I did try FreeDV, and for anybody who's a Linux user, I went to start to put FreeDV because it says you can run under Linux. Looked up some instructions, and it said download these files, run the compiler, do this, do that, and it didn't work for me. So I got a Windows machine out, and I tried on a Windows machine. My problem was on 40 meters, I got plus 10 dB of noise, 9 plus 10 at least, and people either side of the frequency that was supposed to be where the FreeDV was going to happen. And on 20 meters, that as Edmund said, there were just very, very strong stations all over the place, so bits and pieces. And the other thing, I know Ed corrected me on this earlier, but normally 14.072 is used for PSK31, and I just spun my radio down there just to make sure all the hardware was working early on, only to find there was a CW contest on. There was a guy on that frequency transmitting CW, so I pretty much gave up in the end. There was just too much noise here and thing. But going back to the Linux thing, on Monday morning I thought, I'll have another look at this and see if I can compile it again. And then I suddenly went, hang on a minute, I wonder if there's FreeDV in the repository. And sure enough, there was. So I could have done an apt-get install FreeDV, and it would have done it for me. So wouldn't have helped me with the other problems. But yeah, the biggest problem with websites is that there's no dates on them normally. So you don't know what you're reading. Could be 20 years old or written last week. But if you want to install it, certainly under Ubuntu 20.04, you can do it out the repository. Okay, well, that's what I've been up to. And I think we've all been pretty busy. All that's left to do now is thank the boys for joining me, and we'll move on to the next part of the podcast. I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU.
Well, you're certainly welcome. It's a blast as always.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Great, as you say. I'd like to thank Mr. Edmund Spicer, M0MMG.
Thanks for having me on, Martin, and here's to the next time.
Yeah, and we'll be out and about, I'm sure. Probably not before your next podcast, but we will be out and about because we're intending at Hamzilla, aren't we?
Yep, can't wait. I know it's only been about 2 years since I went to the last radio rally, but it feels a lot longer than that. So I think you're right. I think it's going to be very well attended and hopefully a very, very successful event.
Yeah. So Edmund and I believe Chris is coming, maybe Martin. So there'll be a few of us at the ICQ podcast down at Hamzilla in Kent next month. But last but not least, I'd like to thank Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP, for joining us.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Martin, and you and Edmund have fun, and the other guys at Hamzilla. I've got my room booked to be at Friedrichshafen. I'm hoping that will still take place. And let's hope we get out and see some more of our listeners at various Hamfests that we get to during 2022. Yeah, let's see what comes. Let's keep our fingers crossed. And thanks again for the invite, Martin.
Yeah, no problems. And as Ed says, let's hope we can get to as many of these ham events, and at least some of us will meet up with you guys. I won't be in Dayton this year, but I'm sure I'm sure that Dan, Frank, and Bill will be there. Dan normally teaches a class. Are you doing that this year, Dan?
No, I'm not teaching the class. I actually didn't do it that year. We all met there. It just got to the big thing was I had to miss a whole day of Dayton teaching that class. So yeah, I'm skipping it.
Yeah. Well, enjoy Dayton. That's all I'm going to say. Right, I'll say 73 to you guys, and we'll move on with the podcast. 73, guys.
7-3, Martin.
73.
7-3.
The ICQ podcast. Come for a moment. Stay for an hour.
And now it's time for the news in brief with me, Colin M6BOY. We start off with news, obviously in relation to the ongoing news story in Ukraine, that the Vice President of the Ukraine National Radio Society has confirmed the emergency order by the government of the ban on amateur radio stations in Ukraine for 30 days, starting on the 24th of February 2022. So say the IIU Region 1 is monitoring the development and aspects of all radio amateurs, and expecting everyone to follow their national laws and regulations. So just let you know, guys, that ham radio from Ukraine at this moment in time is suspended for 30 days, while obviously the situation plays out in Europe. Now, the next news story is from the States, in the state of Michigan. The National Forest in Michigan are proposing new fees, etc., and this could impact amateur radio operators in the county. This is in relation to a new $1,400 fee system will be put in place, and there are repeaters, etc., that are in that area which, could be affected from the area there. So at the moment, the fact that the amateur radio club in the area are reviewing a letter from the US Forestry Service about the fee for having communications equipment on a forest tower, and obviously negotiating, etc., as they do from there. But as I say, this potential fee could be quite damaging for the repeater group in that area. So if you're in the area, obviously keep an ear out and either, donate to the cost, or you may understand why, that repeater may fall off the air if that fee continues and gets charged to the club in the area. Our final news story is congratulations to Frederike DH9FD, who, as DH9 Foxtrot Delta, has become the youngest German resident to achieve their Class A license. Frederike has done some training with an older brother and started learning about amateur radio 2 years ago, starting off with some online courses, etc. But she's now successfully has passed her A grade license. So congratulations to Germany's youngest A license holder. Well, then we head over to our feature this episode, which is a feature on improving your SSB contact ratio. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now, what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Hi guys, for this episode I wanted to talk about improving your SSB contact ratio. Now, a lot of us use SSB, obviously when we're not using FT8, which is very popular at the moment, I know. As the sunspot cycles moves on, there are more and more SSB contacts happening on air. And we've also had a hell of a lot of newbies join our hobby over the last couple of years. And as the sunspot cycle improves, I kind of wanted to give them the opportunity to get the best results. And also, for some of us who haven't done this for a while, and I must admit me as well, it was a bit of a wake-up call when I started researching this stuff. So, just an idea on what we need to do. Now, there are two operations where you're most likely to operate. One in the shack or with mains power, and one when you're out portable. Now, some of these are good portable tips, some are generic tips right across the board. The first tip I'll give you, in fairness, is set the rig up properly. Now, we're all guilty of this, me included. You get a new rig, you get it out of the box, you want to get it on the air, you do the absolute minimum, and you call CQ and you get a contact. You go, oh yeah, it's working great. Thank you very much, move on. No, it isn't working great. There are adjustments that need to be made. And I'm going to use one short in an acronym, and I'm going to clean it up for the fact that it is a clean rating podcast. RTFM. If you work in the computer industry, you understand what RTFM is. It stands for Read the Funny Manual, or variants of. So, read the manual. Now, the most important thing you're going to have to set up is the microphone gain, and so that you don't over-modulate, you don't overdrive the transceiver. Now, the thing is, we're all different. All our microphones are different. So it has to be set up for the individual. Now, I've done a fair amount of presentations and training, and I kind of project my voice to the back of the room, and I'm quite loud. But I've also heard people that are quite whisperers. So remember, SSB signals are related to the amount of audio that your microphone is receiving. So if you're a whisperer, you might be running, let's say 100 watts, but your rig might only be putting out 5 because you're too quiet. So setting it up correctly is most important. And what you do is you find the section in the manual, microphone gain, and you set it up so that it doesn't overdrive the ALC in the radio. Now, I'm not going to talk about how to do this because pretty much every radio manual tells you how to do this for that particular model. But that is probably one of your most important things to do, is set the microphone gain up correctly. Now, you do this without having any of the digital processing on. You don't want any noise blankers or any compressors on at all. Do it as a standard setup. When you come to add the compressors and one thing and another, don't go mad. Probably no more than 10%. You don't need much compression. If your audio is correct, you will get through the contact because you have clear, punchy audio. Now, having said that, when you're on the top of a hilltop and out portable, you might find it very, very useful to use a windshield over your microphone, because wind blowing across your microphone will create a holy heinous of a noise, and people find it very, very difficult to work here, so they won't bother. So covering your microphone in a windshield, or sticking your microphone in your jacket and holding your head down to the jacket may work, but you need to keep your microphone out of the wind. That's one thing. So using a portable operation, a windshield, is very useful. Now, in the shack, often people suggest using a desk mic, and all the big manufacturers sell desk mics as well as fist mics. In fairness, I went on the internet and I looked, and it said best desk mics for 2020. And I suddenly realised I'd got 2 out of the top 5. And don't get me wrong, they're from 2 different manufacturers. They're very well made. They do what they said on the tin. But, once again, you've got to use them properly. You can't sit the other side of the room, or you can't sit 3 or 4 feet from them and expect them to work particularly well. They need to be worked. You need to be fairly close to them to make them work. That's why a fist mic is probably better. And in fairness, I understand if you're a contester and you're making hundreds of contacts, you've probably got a foot switch and you're trying to type from one thing or another. You don't want to hold a fist mic. But for general coverage, probably a fist mic is your best bet. Now, microphones come in various types. There's the dynamic ones and the electric ones. Whichever one you go for, in fairness, I think if I was talking to Bob Heil at the moment, lovely gentleman, I've met him, he would agree with me. You don't need a Heil PR40 for amateur radio. Reason? It's not a communications microphone. It's a broadcast microphone. So, in fairness, we don't need particular gain below about 400 hertz. Anything below 400 hertz is picked up as noise and creates problems and one thing or another. But bearing in mind, if you've got a lot of bass going out through your microphone, your transmitter's showing you transmitting a lot of power. At the far end, the other radio's probably got it set so that it can't hear below 400 hertz. So if it can't hear below 400 hertz, that's wasted power. The same as you don't need to have a microphone that goes up to 20 kilohertz. Because remember, SSB is only 2.7 kilohertz wide technically, from 300 hertz up to 3 kilohertz. So the bandwidth, you only need a tighter microphone. But what you really need is a microphone that's much punchier within those ranges. Now, some years ago, and I mentioned Bob Heil, some years ago I purchased one of his microphones before I spoke to him, and this is not an advert, this is just something I've got, and I don't think this particular one's available, but there are similar ones. I've got an HM10. Now, it's an original HM10, they make various ones now, and it's got two microphones in the same case. One is an HC5 element, and the HC5 element is more for use with talking to people on the radio, having a nice little chat, rag chewing, nothing special, not particularly punchy. The better one is also, if you're really trying to cut through, it also has an HC4 element in it, and that HC4 element is far more punchy online. And I have seen this when I've been out, that somebody else borrowed my microphone and set it up quickly and had a contact where they've been calling all morning to the same station and not getting them because their audio wasn't that good. So, in fairness, you need a microphone that's very punchy in the frequencies you want. There's no point in it saying, it goes down to 20 hertz and it goes up to 20 kilohertz. Waste of money. You want one that's within the communications band or as near to the communications as possible. Buy a communications microphone if you're going to replace the one you've got in your radio, or came with your radio. Now, the ones that come with your radio are pretty generic. I mean, let's be honest. They're built to a price. They've got to be. And, sometimes you look at it and go, why do I want to spend another £100, £150 on a microphone when I've got one that I'm making contacts with? Well, the difference is, do you want to make lots of contacts, or are you happy with the number you're doing? And that's the advantage here. Now, I think you could, feed a much better microphone. And if you did buy something like the Heil PR40, and I'm picking on Heil here a little bit, but there are other models available. You could run that through a mixer and then feed the mixer into one of the auxiliary sockets on the back of your radio. So you're feeding your audio in on one of the auxiliary sockets. However, when you run it through the mixer, you're going to have to adjust the EQ, which means you're going to kill off all the low frequencies and a lot of high frequencies. So you've suddenly bought a big, expensive microphone to do broadcast radio, but you've killed off all the good frequencies out for broadcast, and no use to you. So Yeah, people do it. They buy mixers with EQ and they adjust the EQ to sound good and punchy. That's great. But just be aware, there are multiple ways of doing it. You wouldn't do that portable. Reason is, you wouldn't want to carry all the gear with you. That's the thing. You wouldn't want to carry a mixer and a power supply for the mixer and all these bits and pieces and extra cables. So, kind of, that one is a shack suggestion. Now, power considerations. Well, let's be honest about it. When you're sitting in a shack, you're probably okay because you've got a nice power supply, you've got mains voltage, you 13.8 volts on your 25 amp or 40 amp power supply, and you're sitting there all smug and happy, and your radio's happy. When you go out in the field, input voltage can affect your rig quite significantly. Most rigs, if you drop them from, say, 13.8, even down to 12 volts, their power will drop off, sometimes by about 20%. So if you're a QRP user running 10 watts, or you think you're running 10 watts on your rig that will run 10 watts at 13.8 volts, you might actually only be running 9 or 10 watts. That's still usable, but be aware you're not actually giving full power. And the other thing is, if you're out portable, keep your power leads as short as possible. Because, in fairness, even copper does have resistance. So you might be 13 volts at the battery, but it might not be 13 volts at the transmitter. And you have to measure the voltage at the transmitter. If you're going to do this, you have to measure it when transmitting. Not when in receive, because they don't draw that much current in receive. But I've certainly seen voltages drop when you go into transmit. So just be aware of those two. Now, for portable operation, not so much for home use, because you can put a linear on or you can do whatever you want power-wise. But if you're out portable, you need to have an antenna that works with your particular radio. Now, you don't want to be wasting power. So I would suggest do your homework. Do your homework before you go. What's the most likely band to be open? Now, in fairness, 20 meters is usually open most of the time. But if you want to operate a different band, work out when that band's going to be available. Don't go out and sit out for ages and the band's not available. Anything you transmit, let's say you transmit 5 watts. If 2 watts of it comes back and is dumped as heat in your ATU, you've just lost 40% of your power. So, in fairness, get an antenna, cut it to soles, so you have a low SWR on a single band when you're out portable. Certainly if you're hill topping or something like that, you don't want to be carrying masses of stuff. And that certainly improves your chances because you're not wasting power. The number one rule when you're out and about, ideally, don't use an antenna tuner. All they do is trick your radio into thinking it's got a good antenna, and whatever comes back gets dumped as heat in the antenna tuner. So pretty much a waste of time. Now on receive, a couple of little things on receive here. When you're out and about on a hilltop or something, if you're using a rig without headphones, the speaker's usually on top of the rig, and it doesn't sound that good, especially when you're out in the wilds. Now, if you can focus your loudspeaker's output towards you, it certainly helps. And I would suggest something like pretty much like a cardboard box with one side open, 2 sides open. So you've got the sound goes in the bottom of the box and it comes forward. It's reflected back towards you. The other 3 sides and the top are closed in so that the speaker sound comes towards you. And I've seen various people do all sorts of things with fancy cuts, but that's the principle that you focus your speaker towards you. And that seems to work. You can use DSP, but remember, and certainly when I'm using my ICOM 703, every time you push a DSP in, it kind of makes a signal clearer, but you lose a lot of other things. So it chops off the noise blankers and all these things, chop off noise and one thing and another, and it reduces the volume of the radio and it makes it sometimes a bit stodgy. So kind of, yes, it works, but you don't always hear everything. So I would use DSP as a last resort. Now, my ICOM 703 also has a 1.8 kc's filter in the IF, and that certainly helps me. And a lot of radios these days have got electronic filters that you can reduce your bandwidth, your transmit bandwidth and receive bandwidth down to cut through the noise and lose the stations either side of you. For me, I'm probably lucky in some ways and unlucky in others, in that I've got a notch filter in my hearing around about 2.4 kilohertz. So when people come up with filter boxes that drop your SSB signal from 2.7 to 2.4, I don't hear any difference. But yeah, that's one of the things I've got to live with. Audio filters are good, and there are a good number of those. Obviously, you can find them online. And the one that I wouldn't be without, and I've only recommended the two things that I use quite regularly, being my high microphone. The other one for receive is my BHI NES 10-2 Mark IV. That makes life just so much more pleasurable when listening to SSB, because between all of the noise, the speaker just cuts it down, so you're not listening to the shushing sound for ages. You know, the audio comes through clearer, far easier to interpret. So they're kind of things that if you're new to the hobby, you may find very useful. But probably the most important thing I've said to you here is RTFM. Read the funny manual, please, because it will save you a lot of aggravation. And if you're set up correctly and your audio's clear, people will work you. If you're distorted, they will possibly ignore you. And this is for everybody. So, I hope this was of interest. And for those of you who already knew this, maybe it's just a bit thought-provoking as we in the Northern Hemisphere get ready to start doing some portable work. I hope this was of use.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Well, everybody, I really hope you enjoyed our feature this episode on improving your SSB contact ratio. And as always with our features, we hope there's a little something there for everybody. So feel free to drop us a line and give us your feedback. It's always great to hear what you guys have to think. We're talking about hearing feedback and things like that. I know that you were telling me during the week that not only are you making contact still on the talk group, and that's ticking along nicely, but you've also got a new way of communicating to you when you're in the shack.
Yeah, certainly have, Colin. Well, the talk group's doing quite nicely, and yeah, it's probably settled down a bit now because I think people have gone back to work. But we're still here. I seem to be lurking on it quite often, and along with others. And it's not just UK time. I do see people on, when I'm asleep in bed. So, it's a 24-hour talk group. In fairness, it's doing well. The other thing is, and a number of our listeners have contacted me. In fact, I got one recently from Paul, who's a VK4, and I apologise, Paul. I can't remember the last two digits. Who rang me on the Ham Shack hotline. And I have a VoIP phone in the shack. If I'm here, I'm more than willing to chat to people. But if you do ring and it doesn't get answered, it doesn't mean I'm ignoring you. It means I'm not in the shack. But apart from that, Colin, yeah, things are pretty good. Done a bit of HF, done a bit of everything, really. So looking forward to seeing what the figures are going to be like on the talk group this month.
Yeah, and I say, guys, we'd really suggest that you check out the pages on the ICQ podcast website for this, and certainly use the system. I say it's on our infrastructure now, so we're paying for the service, etc. So we really would appreciate you guys checking it out, and I say enjoying the platform that we've built over the last few months. Best way to find out the information if you go to digitalgroup.icqpodcast.com, and I say that will take you to the information you require there. So check out those web pages of how you can get involved. Talking about getting involved, we need to do some thank yous, of course, for this episode. So we're going to thank David Pyle, Kilo Whiskey 1 Delta X-Ray, and David Reed, Whiskey 6 Kilo Lima, for their very kind donations to the ICQ podcast. If you found value from today's show or the work that we do, we ask you to help us out by turning that value into a monetary number, visiting icqpodcast.com/donate. And as I say, you turn that help into a monetary figure and send it our way, and everything say we get sent helps us pay our way and helps us keep developing, as I say, the things we do for the ICQ community. So as I say, guys, would really appreciate you looking us up for that there. Now, of course, our show wouldn't be possible without our kind friends who take part in the News Roundtable with us. So we'd like to thank Dan, Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, Ed, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, and Ed DD5 Lima Papa for taking part in this episode's News Roundtable. Thanks a lot, guys, for taking part with us there. Right, well, I think that just about wraps up everything from this episode. Now, obviously, now the most important thing to do is to check for Mrs. B's chocolate biscuits. I'm not sure there's any left over from, say, my previous visit, but if not, I hope you've replenished the cupboards and make her a cup of tea and a chocolate biscuit, and enjoy your afternoon, Mrs. B.
Yeah, I certainly did replenish the cupboard, no problems at all. So, like you said, Mrs. B and me are going to have a cup of tea. She'll have a chocolate biscuit with hers, and that'll be good. And don't forget, guys, I mentioned it a couple of times, we will be at Hamzilla on the 13th of March down in Kent. So looking forward to meeting a few of you there as well. So back to you, Colin.
Yeah, well, I think that's just wraps up now. So let's say 73s to everybody, and we're going to catch up all again in a fortnight's time. 73s all.
73.